Welcome, everyone. On today's episode, we're going to be covering how to engage with government if government is a source of potential revenue or contracts for you as a small business owner or large business owner. And to do that, we're going to talk with one of the recent Seedcamp companies called Stotles. From their website, governments are becoming more transparent. That's great, but just because they're making their information available doesn't necessarily mean they're making it accessible. This clutter and confusion has made working with government suck as an unfortunate truism. It scares off great suppliers and diminishes the value of our taxes provide. We're not cool with this, so we're taking a play out of Aristotle's book, bringing together messy government data, the parts, and building a knowledge base, the whole, to create a level playing field in the public sector. Our mission is to be the place where public sector information flows with purpose and ease. We want those who can provide the best services to win, not those who simply know the process best. And so the idea from Stotles, and when we looked at it to invest in, was how can we make government contracts available? So thanks guys for joining. We're looking forward to discovering how startups and larger companies can engage with governments.
Absolutely, good to be here.
So let's start off with how you guys met. Like what were you guys doing before? I know that you guys all met while you were doing your studies, but I mean, most people that are doing their MBA or studies aren't necessarily thinking about building a startup that addresses government contracting. How'd that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it all stems from what we experienced in our early careers, right? I mean, up until March, right, this area of public sector has really, I don't know the word, taken for granted, but flown under the radar. And what's been happening since COVID-19 has kind of taken over the world is people are starting to realize how integral it is to the entirety of the world, right? It's 14% of global GDP, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars flow from governments to businesses every single year. But until you actually get your hands dirty in it and have experienced it and walk down the dark halls of public procurement offices, you don't really think of it as something that is something that runs the global economy. And so for all three of us, I mean, young boys growing up don't dream about transforming public sector procurement using technology. But I think the reason we really bonded during the MBA at London Business School was we had these shared experiences and shared nightmares in the procurement realm, and really rally around that, as weird as it sounds.
And I mean, public sector procurement's not a typical cocktail party topic. So once the three of us got on a yarn about it, we knew that we had to do something about it.
Taj, did you guys have a chat about your knowledge about the space? Because it seems like one that, even simply in your website, it states that it's something that you need to be in the know to really tap into. I mean, for companies that are thinking about starting something, especially now in spaces where perhaps people have been afraid to touch because they've been too complex. How did you guys even begin thinking about how to tackle this?
Well, it comes down to, as John mentioned, a lot of the suffering that we went through trying to sell to the government. In my case, I had a previous business where we were selling equipment to government-owned mining companies, and we had to go through these public procurement processes, and it was just a nightmare. We didn't get anywhere with it. And when I came to the MBA, it was a very sore spot for me, and I talked about it probably too much. And as we kind of went through the motions, we realized that of the motions of discussing this, and John had been on the other side auditing government agencies, we realized that it doesn't come down to any malicious intent from governments. It just comes down to very difficult and opaque admin. And getting through that admin is probably, the real reason why most companies don't want to deal with it. It just seems so nightmarish. It seems so difficult that they need help. And that was really the catalyst for Stotles. If we use tech, if we use all the data that's out there and is very difficult to track down, we can create a product that takes away the difficulties, takes away the friction, and brings more small businesses, medium business, large businesses into the fold and increases competition and really has a great outcome for everybody in this market, both the suppliers, the government buyers, and in the end, the taxpayer. There's a great stat that I absolutely love from the European Procurement Commission. It's on their front page that even a 1% increase in efficiency is a 20 billion euro saving for the taxpayer. So all these things kind of came together where, this is a win-win-win for everyone.
I mean, when you look at that, when you say it's a win-win-win for everyone, in order to make something that simple, there has to be quite a bit of integrations. You know, like part of software is finding the best integrations and making it super easy and smooth. How did you guys think about the early beginnings of this product, just to get a sense for what people are actually interfacing with? Is it direct straight line through to like a person who makes a decision within government, or is it just like a user interface that just simplifies the information that's available out there, but there's still a lot of paper pushing on the back end?
Yeah, so from the user's perspective, it's effectively a feed of the relevant leads within the government that they need to know about in order to keep a pulse on their market and the opportunities that they should be chasing down. When we think about how that actually happens in the background, it's a three-step process where we're basically aggregating a huge amount of data that the government is publishing. And it's worth mentioning that that wasn't possible 5-10 years ago, because a lot of governments are now migrating to digital frontiers, to e-procurement. And so that machine readable data is now just sort of to crystallize as something that's available for businesses and researchers to tap into. So we aggregate all that data. That's step one. Step two is matching. So we have millions of opportunities, and our customers, for example, cybersecurity consultant only wants to see those relevant ones. So we make those connections and then give them the tools to action it. So at this point, we show them who they should be talking to and when, and give them all the context they need to make intelligent decisions. And then they will go through the bidding process with the buyer.
So walk us through, maybe we take 2 steps back. Walk us through a pre and post. So a company before Stotles and the company after, what was the traditional process, just to anybody who's not familiar with this and is considering engaging with government? Walk us through what they would have had to do and now what they would do.
So I can take this one. The way we like to think about it is there's all this information out there, and companies had ways of getting this information. So that's all the way down to where are these tender documents. Previously in the past, they had to go to all these government websites. They had to search through and find all of the relevant opportunities on their own. That's something that we've been able to automate. But perhaps more importantly, and what really moves the needle, is we can tell them when those documents are coming out and who they're going to come from before they actually do. And so that's important, because in this space, and pretty much in all sales everywhere, you want to have relationships with the seller before they actually go to market, because that puts you in the best situation to influence what the actual scope of work is going to look like, what the values are, and it puts you in the best stage for when you're going to be competing with other suppliers. John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I think that's the exact, when we talk about misconceptions in the public sector, right? I mean, there's often this stigma around it, around like people having dinners and passing brown bags of money to close deals. In reality, the transparency that has come has eliminated a lot of that, right? Any corruption in government has been eliminated through transparency and the procurement processes that have come into place. But what transparency has also done is created a situation where every government publishes every need, and the market has begun to react to those needs on these databases. But in reality, that's just where the procurement process begins. There's a whole sequence of work and selling process that occurs even way before that procurement process. So what we found in our studies is that if you are beginning to try to get into government right when the RFP documents or the tender documents come out, the win rates on those outcomes are less than 4%. Versus if you pre-engage, build relationships, try to drive value, solve problems with your product within the government, your win rates go upwards of 45%. And so that's really the crux of the before and after, right? Before, people were being reactive to tenders that were coming out. Oh, great transparency, let's go, we can see all these opportunities. But in reality, relationships are what drive markets, right? Private sector, public sector, whatever it is. So what we're doing instead in the past, where a very select few had the ability to build and maintain relationships with the public sector and would win these gigantic contracts. Now what we're doing is democratizing that information that allows people to move from reactive to proactive, to build relationships before that tender and actually improve their outcomes in the public sector. So it's all around this idea of using data to allow people to be more proactive and build the right relationships at the right time.
So walk us through what proactivity looks like, though. So I understand what you're saying, like, A, there was a lack of information. B, that lack of information led to the people having to be reactive to whenever it was found rather than proactive in teeing it up so that you have higher probability of getting the contract. But what does building a relationship look like at the end of the day? Because even if I have access to this data, it doesn't shortcut that. I think you used the expression like brown bag, you know, it's like, how do you still interface there?
Yes. So the important thing, just for clarity, is that this has nothing to do with corruption. This is when a procurement manager within a government entity has to go out and buy something, he's not an expert in that specific thing, right? Because this procurement manager has to buy everything from toilet paper to CRM systems. So to figure out what that tender document is going to look like, he has to figure out what the scope of work looks like, how much roughly they're going to pay for it, and all the other bits and pieces. The best way to do that is for them to speak to existing suppliers and form that scope of work and the potential value of it. The suppliers that are part of that conversation have an advantage. So what suppliers do, this is the reason why they have, you know, BDRs and sales reps. They do actual outbound, they organize events, they pay consultants to point them in the right direction so that they can speak to the right procurement managers at the right time. Namely, you know, a few months before they're actually going to be putting this tender out, and they're in that stage of figuring out what the scope of work looks like and how much they're going to pay for it. So really what we're doing is systematizing that, allowing them to point their sales teams in the right direction so that they're focusing on the most likely leads at the right time and they have the right contact information to actually reach them.
I'm going to ask you guys, maybe if you have a chance for people who are watching this, to share a screen. I don't know if maybe Carsten, you have a screen ready, but I'll let you know. I'll cue it up.
All right, let me
so that
just as like a bit of a
visualize, some of the stuff.
Absolutely.
But while you're doing that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about sectors. I mean, I think people understand government, big government, right? And I mean, look, I'm as new to this as probably the listeners in the sense that I don't know how government procurement works, right? This is your area of expertise. And one of the things is that for me, like if you're in the States, for example, that could include everything from NASA to, you know, MOD or, you know, Department of Defense or the health system, right? And so when you guys talk about this, what elements are available on Stotles and what is not?
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, right? If you look at the public sector, like Taj mentioned, they buy anything from toilet paper to CRM systems, right? And our system has all the data around all those things that governments buy. Really what it comes down to is what Carsten mentioned earlier, is being more systematic and data-driven about how our suppliers on our platform are matched to, one, the actual opportunities that come out, two, the leading indicators that are relevant to them, and three, the actual specific areas or departments or people in government that are specifically related to the need that they can go after. So what I'm getting at here is it's no different than selling the private sector, right? If you sell CRM systems, you want to go talk to CTOs, chief marketing officers in the private sector. You want to do that same thing in the public sector within buyers. And so really what we're trying to get at is being very crisp and clear in our platform around how our suppliers are able to engage with the right people. That means finding the right contact in a specific buyer. That means finding leading indicators, meaning what's the story, a typical story of a CRM purchase? Is it year 5, year -5, a digital transformation initiative goes into place, year -4, a chief marketing officer comes into place? What are those kind of breadcrumbs that typically lead to an opportunity? So that then our users can then map that across the entire market and say, okay, well, buyer X is showing these signals more than buyer Y. Let's prioritize our relationship building and our sales efforts with buyer X. And so I guess one example of how those leading indicators take place is, I mean, you could look at in the sector of like energy, right? There's a fuel client that we have that sells fuel to government fleets, government agencies that have cars. Well, they could chase fleet tenders or fleet RFPs where governments want to buy cars, but they could actually also get more proactive by, tenders where governments are buying fuel. But actually what they want to do is chase opportunities and build relationships in areas where governments are actually buying cars, where that subsequent need for fuel is coming. So that's an example where the leading indicators can allow our clients on our platform to find which relationships to go build.
Great.
I
I
can
don't
give
know
a
if you
little
want.
sneak peek.
Yeah, Carsten, please go ahead. Show us
Sure,
sort of an example of that. And then Taj,
absolutely.
maybe I'd like to explore some other sectors, like the sort of maybe sectors ranked by order of need at the moment, since you guys
Yeah,
have a live view.
yeah. In terms of the sectors that we're focusing on, John mentioned that our data actually covers all sectors, but the companies that we're focused on helping on today are in the digital vertical. So companies that provide digital services, usually software products, but also in the consulting and advisory realm. That's because digital is one of the biggest growing sectors for the public sector as digitization takes over. On a separate note, because of the COVID-19 situation, we for free are providing help to healthcare and really any other related sectors. That's a little bit of a separate topic, but just wanted to highlight it. There are other sectors that pretty much all sectors that provide goods and services are relevant to this and we can expand into. The only one that I'd point out is a little bit different is defense. And that's specific to the very large ticket specialized items, things like nuclear submarines or nuclear warheads, things that are created. There's only a handful of companies that really serve those type of needs, companies like BAE Systems. They really don't have a need for our product, but everyone else in defense, things like temporary labor, security services for embassies, all of those things still go through traditional procurement processes, and we see them flow through the data that we have. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, you did. It's helpful to at least sort of stack and rank the sectors. It sounds like for sure some of them are going to be off limits, and then some of them are very, very apropos for a startup to engage with government. And so maybe with that, Carsten, do you want to walk us through what we're seeing here?
Yeah, sure. So you are seeing it. Wanted to confirm. Okay, cool. So this is really the proactive tooling that we've been talking about how our customers can get ahead of the tenders that are coming out. So this is one of our customers. You may have peeked the name there, but so what you're looking at is their pipeline out into the future in terms of indicators of spend materializing. And that's basically populated by a bunch of different indicators that we've extracted by looking at the data from a number of different angles. So for example, one particularly popular one is by looking at competitors. So they can look at, okay, what are the different contracts that our competitors hold now? And the reason that that's a valuable leading indicator is because this contract is in force until the end of May. At that point, the government is going to need to go to tender for the renewal. And so our customer can look at this and say, okay, great, Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency, that's a relationship we should invest in now so that when that renewal comes around, we have an actual competitive chance in this tender. And it's also, so you can kind of click in, get all the details on the specific leads. And it's also worth noting that it's a pretty complex chain in a lot of cases. Like for example, here, this is a ServiceNow product, but implemented by Accenture. So there's often a bunch of links that you have to go through in the chain in order to get those nuggets of information.
Yeah, and all this information is stuff that would have been publicly available. It's just that you've organized it really well.
Exactly. So yeah, there's nowhere else where you can go and just type in ServiceNow and see all of the contracts that they hold and relationships they have. They don't even hold this contract. This is just a relationship that we've inferred. So yeah, you're exactly right in that all this information is available, but it's not accessible, and we close that gap.
Okay, while we have the screen on, maybe we can switch from this particular customer to just like what a new, like right now, just imagine you're a startup, you're potentially even thinking about pivoting, and you're thinking, okay, what contracts can I close? Whether you enterprise software company of any sort, and you wanted to go on Stotles now and be like, okay, I'm going to try to see if I can, bid on any one of these contracts. What would that landing screen look like? Maybe walk us through. What would the discovery process look like?
So, I mean, for our typical flow, what we do is we push the relevant things to our customers. A kind of product insight that we've crystallized over the past is folks are much less interested in tools where they have to go and pull the relevant stuff out and search for it. They just want it to be pushed to them. So we actually, via our onboarding process, understand what all those needs are, and then build the query that then on a regular basis spits out that feed. So here you can see the feed of all of the new items coming through and all of those that have been already addressed and have follow-up tasks, et cetera, to bring it across the line. I mean, you can go in and search for whatever it is that you need, PPE, for example, and so you can do that exploration. What we've found is that folks are much less likely to do this versus just having it served up to them.
Yeah.
And I think the important kind of distinction here is that tender inbox, the push feed of those RFPs or tenders that are coming out, again, is a starting point, some ending point, right? It's a way to get a pulse on the market and see what's coming through. But the real hope is to take that journey from reactive to proactive, right? To start seeing, okay, how do we start moving from reacting to these tenders to being proactive about how we build relationships in the public sector? Because I think that's, at the end of the day, what will really move the needle and improve win rates and improve your outcomes. So that's one thing that we do like to talk with our clients about is, look, yes, it's this kind of necessary evil where you need to keep tabs on these tenders, but take them with a grain of salt. Don't just rely on the transparency that exists through tenders and negate your normal sales processes, right? You still need to get up the funnel, build relationships, and shape opportunities to actually make an indent. And that's where we really try to use the more advanced tools to help people do so.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And it's good to see the variety of choices and sectors available there. That last example of PPE, for example, highlighted that you could even look for things as on point as that. Now, in terms of jurisdictions, when you did that search, I noticed that some of them were coming from Dublin, some were coming from the UK. Walk us through some of the myths that people probably have about engaging with governments. For example, long time ago, I ended up having to deal with a US related thing, and a requirement was that you had to be a US citizen, and so that sort of excluded several people and providers because they didn't have the security clearance so maybe some myths, like, do you have to be from the government that is doing it? Is there certain qualifiers, certain approvals or grants or something like that?
So one myth that I've definitely seen is that governments are not really willing or interested in engaging in new solutions, in new processes or techniques. The government is very hungry to engage with these. They absolutely see the value, and I would say the UK government in particular is a leader amongst the world in terms of adopting newer methods. I mean, open banking is a bit of a tangential example there, but the exact same thing is happening in the procurement space. So, I mean, a lot of the folks listening to this probably more interested in the digital sphere. The UK government has a Spark framework, which is exclusively dedicated to novel solutions that, a government isn't going to be saying, oh, we need a tender for a computer vision service that will detect car crashes via our CCTVs. But they realize that there's value there, and they're creating channels that these innovative solutions can come through. So again, to the kind of relationship side of things, it's the exact same as in the private sector, where you need to go out there and engage with folks and to get them excited about what you're doing. And these channels do exist.
Yeah, I guess the one myth or misconception that we often see out there is, and it's a lot of it's kind of related to either a recency bias or availability bias of either a news story or like one really poor experience in trying to sell the public sector. But it's the fact that just because things are transparent doesn't necessarily mean they're easy to win, right? And what I mean by that is just because a tender comes out doesn't mean that you're entitled to win it. I mean, what's happening here is that tender is being advertised to thousands and thousands of suppliers. At the end of the day, if you're relying on a single tender and going to bid on it, you're going to have the same success as you would as if you went to a private sector company, knocked on their door and said, you want to buy this without even ever having talked to them before. So really what it comes down to is people, because of the transparency that exists, people begin to rely on those tenders without actually realizing that they need to keep that same quality of process and sales cycle behavior that they do in their normal sales channels with the private sector.
No, that's a good point. Tush, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that or any other myth that.
Yeah, I think kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to government procurement is that people think that there's a lot of brown bags going around, and these things are decided over dinner somewhere, and truly it's impossible. I am sure it may happen in some countries with some contracts.
Every single Netflix series involves this happening.
Exactly.
I mean, honestly.
And
I wonder where people get it from.
The War Dogs movie didn't help.
Yeah.
But really, the processes are so strict and the regulatory environment is so strict for the actual procurers, so the buyers in this space, that they often won't even accept a glass of water from someone if they think that it could get them in trouble. So really, the environment is very fair. But as John mentioned, what's important here is you still need to go through a selling process. You still need to convince someone to buy something from you, and that's not as easy as just putting in a bid and hoping that it's going to stick. It comes down to really pleading your case, creating excitement about what you're doing, and showing why you are the best supplier to do it, and why your service or product is better than everything else out there in terms of value to the buyer. And that really cannot go overlooked. That's something that's difficult to do, and we're here to help companies do that as best they can.
Yeah.
To tie together those myths, really what we see these myths are as these are the very same things that have created the stigma around the public sector. And what that stigma does is leads people to forget about the tremendous upside and the tremendous amount of opportunity that's there to, one, create social impact, two, grow their businesses. And so for us, I think the big thing that we constantly want to try to bring to the surface is the scale at which B2G operates, right? I mentioned at the very beginning, 14% of global GDP flows from governments to businesses. Huge opportunity, ripe for technological disruption. You've got a situation in the public sector where now everyone's realizing how important it is, right? Thousands of government workers who have never really used laptops now being forced to kind of move towards accelerated digital transformation, PPE that needs to get from supplier to buyer but can't. Right? It's such an interesting and bizarre economic situation we're in where demand is urgent, supply is eager, buyers want to buy, sellers want to sell, but the systemic process and friction in place is keeping them from doing so. And so that's exactly what we're trying to tackle to try to bust some of these myths.
Yeah. And you shared with me your common high-level success sequence. I don't know if you want to go through it, John, but
Yeah, happy to. I think the big thing here is, first and foremost, is the change in mindset, right? Kind of the exact things that I was just kind of talking about. It's all about changing your mindset towards the public sector and not relying on tenders to come out to be your source of leads, your sole source of leads. And then the second is really tied to that. Use data as a gas pedal, not a brake, right? If you're relying on tenders and using that data to be the thing that's going to drive all your sales efforts, you're going to show exactly what the statistics show, win rates less than 4 or 5%. So really using the data that's out there to get proactive, get up the sales funnel, build relationships with the right message and the right person. And then the third thing there is to build the credibility. And this goes for people currently selling public sector, new entrants to public sector. Keep it simple, I guess is what we say. What we've found and we've seen tremendous success from our clients when they do one thing really well, build a case study around it, and begin to share that story across the public sector. People talk, right? At the end of the day, this is people-based. And we're saying that as a data-driven company, right? No amount of data will ever replace the relationships that need to be built. But what you can do is use the data to know what relationships you need to build and build them with credibility. And then from there, it's all about rinsing and repeating. I think if I were to give one tip for somebody who's never worked with public sector before and wants to get into it, it's, I'm stealing a line from Paul Graham here, but do things that don't scale. Do one simple thing, win one contract, build one relationship that gets you in, and from there, you'll be able to build that credibility and start to grow in the public sector.
Great. No, that's great advice. And, I want to wrap up this chat with things about Stotles, more specific to the company and you guys. I know that you've launched this in the UK and in Europe, but I want to talk a little bit about the bigger vision. What the bigger vision is as a company, what drives you guys, and where do you see your company being, 5-10 years from now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everything we've described at this point, that being our software as a service for suppliers to help get into the public sector, is setting the stage for a big vision that we have, right? Our mission as a company is to unlock the potential of business and government working better together. And toward that mission, everything we're doing right now around bringing suppliers on board, allowing them to use data to get into the public sector, and then begin facilitating relationships with the buyer side, those are the things that we see as beginning to unlock our ability to really start to reduce the friction in public sector, right? At the point that we have suppliers that are working on our platform that can start to get pre-qualified and vetted more easily, we can also enable buyers to find suppliers more quickly, vet suppliers more quickly, and begin to unlock not only single-sided effects, but kind of the dual-sided effects of people being able to work together without the friction. Yeah, and I think Taj and Carsten for sure have some thoughts on this as well in terms of the specifics of what it unlocks. But I think the main point here is that this is only the beginning. It's setting the stage to really open things up, make things more fair, and make people's lives a lot easier.
Yeah. My tack onto that is really in one sentence, what we're trying to create is Procurement 2.0, right? We're a world where there is no administrative burden between the buyers and the suppliers. And any buyer that is looking to buy a good or service will have access to all the relevant suppliers, all of those that want to compete for that work, and will be very quickly and efficiently able to whittle that down to the number one best and give them that work, right? A process that currently takes weeks, sometimes months, should be a couple of clicks, maybe a day, no more than that.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on more from a product perspective. Really, what we're driving towards and what we're building now is a knowledge base, which is the most accurate representation of the public sector procurement landscape in the world. And from there, we can just leverage that, use that information from a huge amount of angles in order to serve suppliers as we are now, buyers in the future, third-party services that surround it. I mean, the possibilities are endless once we have that view crystallized.
Excellent. Well, guys, thanks for joining. That was great to hear. Hopefully very helpful for startups thinking about engaging with governments. And any tips on how to get in touch with you if somebody needs help or anything like that?
Yeah, we're always open. We've got email team@stotles.com. So Stotles is spelled STOTLES, in case that helps. And yeah, email us at any time. We're building up our early adopter list and bringing folks on board to help them really charge into the public sector with confidence.
Cool. So with that, guys, until next time, bye.